I'm so excited to have you here today, PT. Thank you so much for joining us on the Everyday Mystic.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Earlier, when we were speaking, I felt such a mirror of your experiences, things you've been through, and how they've mirrored mine. I'd love for you to share with the audience a bit about your background, because we'll get into all of the incredible, mystical, beautiful work that you're doing now. But I know that you didn't start there, and that was spurred by and kind of instigated by some of the events in your life. So let's go back a bit and share a little about where it all began.
Yeah, thank you. So I spent, most of my adult life doing the, normal things that we do, going to school, getting a good education, getting into the corporate world. So I had always had an interest in art. So I kind of wove together my interest in art and into a practical form, working with museums and started consulting with museums and other cultural organizations and really enjoyed the work and, climbed the corporate ladder and was doing, everything that I dreamed of in my professional world, but in my personal life, things were kind of a shit show. So
Mm,
I had, really developed some coping strategies early on in my teens and 20s to really kind of numb out my emotions and, develop some habits around drinking and eating and exercise that were pretty unhealthy and pretty destructive. So
mm,
while everything really looked beautiful on the outside, I was really struggling on the inside.
mm. There's so many people living out here that are in that place. And I know that your story will resonate because they're, the external or the masks that we show to the world are, it's so easy to live behind those, live behind achievements, live behind, um, perfectionism and in a lot of different forms and live behind, coming from this side. Now, obviously, people can show a lot of their internal chaos externally when, maybe they haven't created great strategies like you did. So it sounded like you created some really powerful mechanisms and strategies to be able to be in this world while you were struggling, which kudos to you for that. Because I think a lot of times people just look at the aspect that, oh God, I was such a mess then and I was so bad. But really, you created powerful strategies that allowed you to be in the world and to also be successful in the world while still struggling. And that's not an easy task to do. So you must have carried such a heavy weight on your shoulders and mentally and spiritually during that time, it sounds
Yeah, and
like.
my spiritual self was really disconnected, and that really was part of it. Even at an early age, I felt very spiritually connected. I felt connected to the earth and, had a spiritual awakening when I was 16, but it was so disruptive and so overwhelming. And I didn't really have the support system or the understanding to know what to do with it, that I continued to kind of like shut it down and close it off.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Northeast Pennsylvania. So shout
Okay.
out to all the Philly listeners.
Yeah. So not an area or even maybe a time period when there were other, spiritual communities and masters and people around, right? I mean, if like maybe you grew up in the Bay Area in the 80s or grew up in, the Colorado in the 70s. I don't know. I'm just picking some places out that I know were early, more advanced, or just, ahead of times, at least in this country, of there being more spiritual communities outside of just your traditional church spiritual communities, to where maybe that you had a chance. Maybe if you grew up in Taos, New Mexico, or right, maybe you had a chance to
Right.
have these awakenings be encouraged and guided. But you in Philly, I grew up in New Hampshire, so similar thing. At 16, I had a spiritual awakening, a spiritual event that was completely clear to me, but I had no one around me to talk with about it, to help guide me in it, or to even validate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you, after that experience, did you kind of go back to just, okay, well, just go back to my normal living, because what the hell was that? We're just going to kind of put that away over here.
Yeah, and I really had to. And, art was, an expressive tool for me. So it was around that time that I really started to dedicate a lot of my spare time into my artistic pursuit. So that was really a saving grace for me at that time. And then, even into my teenage years, I had always really had a lot of social anxiety in the school setting, and I was bullied quite a bit. And there was, a period in late in my high school where I was kind of ostracized from my friend group, and that was a lot of trauma for me during
Mm.
that time in my life. So that's when I started to really, look towards alcohol to numb out. And at the same time, I was pouring a lot of my sorrow and my grief for the loss that I experienced through the loss of those friends into my art.
Mm. Well, I'm so glad you had an outlet. You took that outlet and then ended up going to into art school, or doing an art degree. Is that right?
I minored in art and I majored in business.
Mm.
I grew up in a household where my parents are small business people, and they really like imprinted that work ethic, and you can really achieve anything that you want in life through working hard. So I did study marketing as well.
Okay, so then you ended up combining those in a powerful way, art and business. Is
Right.
that right?
Yep.
Mhm. Beautiful. So that career in art and business and being a corporate executive and living that way, what, at what point did you have a realization that that wasn't the life you wanted to live, or that that life was potentially even harming you?
Yeah, so I continued on that kind of career track until I was around 34. And I had also gotten married at the time, and, was living in a beautiful house and kind of had, all the things, all the markers of success that were expected to have. And, the man that I was married to didn't drink at all. And he would just see the amount of alcohol that I was consuming and just the recycling bins like pouring up with wine bottles. And he started to question me on it about a year into our relationship.
Mm.
And at that point, he challenged me to stop drinking for a month. And if I stopped drinking, he was going to buy me a prize. So he was going to buy me a piece of jewelry from my favorite jewelry designer in LA. And I agreed. I took up his challenge, and it was over the course of that month that, like, slowly, this kind of veil of and this heaviness of depression that was really like I was carrying around in my auric field. It started to lighten and lighten. And then, a few weeks in, I just felt like my brain turned back on, and I started feeling more energized. I started reconnecting with my spiritual self. And it was that time, as I opened up all this space from the time that I was spending drinking, and numbing out, I started meditating, and I started, I rediscovered Kundalini yoga. And I started investing a lot of this time that I had been spending before drinking on these more spiritual practices. And as I, started feeling good, it was just like, how do I feel even like better? Like, how do I really optimize how I feel? And that, it's like we follow the breadcrumbs in life, right? So it was like,
Mhm.
I remember you know, learning about in the beginning about like the bulletproof lifestyle, right? And listening
Mhm.
to Dave Asprey's podcast, and that like, led nuggets to like and Aubrey Marcus, and you just follow the breadcrumbs. And with, during that period, I started learning about sacred plant medicines. So while I was feeling, better and inspired, there was still that like that seeker really came back online. And as soon as I started hearing about, ayahuasca, I knew immediately that that was pulling me, and
Mm.
I was going to do whatever it took to get my ass down to the jungle and to see what that was all about.
Mm. So she called to you strongly.
She was screaming, yes.
Get your ass to Peru. I'm so glad that you listened to that call. So you went down and you had, what was that? Was that your first plant medicine experience then with Aya?
That was my first plant medicine with Aya. I had experimented with psychedelics when I was a teenager, mainly with like mushrooms and LSD and cannabis and some other things. But that was the first time that I really experienced like a sacred ceremony that was done for healing and
Mm.
done with, master facilitators that were really just looked like magicians to me. And I still hold them in that regard.
Mm. So did you not look back at all to alcohol and drinking from that initial challenge, or was it a struggle to kind of stay away from it?
It was I never looked back until until COVID. Actually, I
Mm.
did have a relapse in 2020, and it was it was after many years of doing a lot of deep work and cleaning and healing with Aya, and I even had a medicine experience with Iboga, which is one of the, if not the most powerful psychedelics on the planet. It's like alien technology medicine.
Mm.
Um, and I felt so grounded and like so established in my sobriety that I thought that I could start to dip my little toe back in to enjoy it in a healthy way, to have a healthy relationship with it. And I was dating someone at the time who was very much like a wine connoisseur and really enjoyed having, the right wine with the right food, and was just really, I missed that piece of it. So I started out very slow with just having like a little sip, and then maybe like half a glass. And a couple of weeks into that, I was witnessing myself, in Whole Foods grocery shopping, and I'm watching myself just put bottles of wine in my cart.
Mm.
And I asked myself, like, Pritam Tara, like, are you really going to do this? Like, is this happening?
Mm.
And just given all of the stress and all of the demands that the collective was going through at that time and what I was going through personally, I made a choice. I was like, yeah, I want to feel this right now. And I kept drinking for maybe a month or two in that relapse. And it took, you know, it took that time for me to like really feel again how lower my vibration got from consuming that substance. And then I made a choice that no, this is not the life I want to live. And, you know, I will never drink again. I know
Mm.
that for a fact. And I think the relapse really was a good lesson for me to, one, know that I I can't have a moderated relationship with that particular substance. And two, like, why would I want to? Like, why would
Mhm.
I want to consume something that really lowers my vibration and my vitality in that way?
Mhm.
So it's, yeah, I'm grateful for the relapse for that reason.
Yeah, it's true of any type of relapse into anything, right? Of that you get to experience that thing again. Maybe you've had a issue with anger and you relapsed into this, rageful moment when you've been working on centering and gratitude and being calm. And you get to learn from that relapse of, well, who am I in this situation? Do I want to? And have those conversations. So I love that you brought that up of that you talked to yourself, because that's one easy way for anybody who's just dabbling in spirituality, dabbling in, this inner journey that we talk about on the Everyday Mystic. One of the easiest ways to connect is to talk to yourself. Just literally have that conversation. You can have it silently. You can have it out loud if you want. If you don't feel, if you don't feel like you're going to disturb anybody, though, that's one of the best ways to tune in and to communicate to that deep inner self, because we're making so many choices automatically, right? You just do, and you kind of habitually, it's like being an automaton. It's like you're a robot of yourself. And you're just kind of being in this automated mode. But when you stop and just tune in and actually talk to yourself, you get different answers. You get deeper answers. You get wiser answers. So that's just for those listening. I know it doesn't sound like a practice, but it really is, because I think it can take some practice in getting into that mode of actually stopping and having those conversations. Some of the simplest things like breathing and self-talk and being in alignment, just sitting here in your body, whatever. These things sound so simple, right? But they do often take practice, because we can be so out of practice, so out of whack of doing these very simple things. While we're on the subject of simple yet profound, I don't want to diminish the impact that those simple things have. That's the point of it, is that they're simple to execute, but they're so profound in the changes that they make. And I don't know if that's what scares people or keeps them away from those things, or they think maybe it's not going to do anything because it's so simple. Are there any other practices in your daily life that you do that are simple and attainable like that, but that have profound impacts?
Yeah. And with any new practices, I think change is hard. Change is inherently hard to not just, start a practice or start an intentional self-talk or an intentional journaling practice where we're getting into that dialogue, but then sticking with it, right? It's almost like we need to learn new ways of communicating and new ways of thinking and new ways of being, and our default way of doing things gets so hardwired and so ingrained, it can be challenging to just shift ourselves in a new direction. But the practice is key, right? And the things that we practice really are the foundation and like the building blocks of our future self. So the practices, I form my life around my sacred practices because they really are that foundation from which we can build intentionally and then go out to live our life from in a more intentional and a more directional way. And the practices that have really like anchored in me, and I do want to say, there are so many practices, right? There are
Mhm.
so many breathwork techniques and so many types of yoga you can do, and microdosing with different medicines and meditation. And it's good to test, right? to like survey and like dig little dig holes, right? But then when you find the things that really resonate with you, that really you enjoy doing and that do make a difference, then it's like going deep on those particular things. Like at some point we have to like stop drilling and we have to
Mhm.
like find what works for us and then like go deep, and that's where we hit oil, right? We dig those wells deep. And the practices that have really been the most transformational for me are Kundalini yoga, combining this practice, this beautiful practice that is a technology. It's a yogic science of working with the body, the breath, the mind, and all of the physical and the subtle energy bodies, and also microdosing and working with sacred medicine in an intentional way.
Mm.
And there are so many within, even within like the Kundalini yoga technology, there are so many practices that are like these little bite-sized things that you can have in your toolkit that you can pull from anytime that your nervous system is maybe feeling dysregulated, or you need to bring yourself back into the present moment and really ground and really clear.
Is there anything you can share with us right now? Like, let's say someone's having one of those uh, out of body, like they're in a reactionary state. They're feeling anxious or angry, or they're reacting big time to something going on. They're feeling very, I would say, energetically scattered. And aside from going to a kundalini class or going to a retreat, what's a can you offer up a simple practice, something that they could do to get grounded and centered in that moment?
Yeah, one of my favorite really quick acting breath work techniques, it's called fists of anger. And this is, especially if you are looping on anything, or you're frustrated or you're angry with someone, you can bring your hands into fists and the thumb comes in the middle. And then with an O mouth breath, you're really just kind of panting hard. And then you're sweeping the fist like
Ooh.
up and around, like through, yeah, like through the arc line, all the way through the central channel. And when you can do this for 2 or 3 minutes, and it just really clears out that, all the gunk, right? That's really circulating. And you feel much more grounded and much more centered and much more calm. Now
I love
that's
that.
hard to do, like if you're in a meeting, right? And things are getting
You
a
might
little
want to
tough.
excuse yourself to the bathroom.
Yeah. But even just, if you find yourself in a relay, in a conversation or in a situation, just as something as simple as putting your hand on your belly and doing long, slow, deep breathing through the nose and out through the nose, and like breathing into the diaphragm, and you're just showing your body and your nervous system that you can self-regulate. And once your body like realizes like you are in control, and that's the quickest way to regulate the nervous system is through the breath. The breath really is um that point of communication between the body and the mind.
I love that. Just you could do that in a meeting, you could do that anywhere, you could do it in the car, or wherever you are, right? Just breathing and holding that solar plexus, diaphragm, stomach area, right?
Mhm.
This uh, fist, what was it called? Fist of anger?
Fist of anger. Yep.
Fist of anger. Do you recommend doing that sitting, standing, or either?
Yeah, it's really important to be in a cross-legged position on the floor, because you want to have your base, your lower triangle, the lower chakras in alignment, and you want to have
Really.
that energy being able to like ground through your
Hmm.
root on the floor.
Great. Awesome tips there. Thank you. Now, let's talk a bit more about microdosing. You mentioned that as being a powerful practice for you. Is that something after you had your ayahuasca experience, which was not a microdose of ayahuasca, right? You did the full blown experience. Um, from there, how did you transition into the world of microdosing?
Yeah, so after that first experience down in Peru, which was 5 ceremonies over the course of a week, something really shifted in me. So I felt like everything kind of came back into alignment, and I had a reason to live again, which, to be honest, I really didn't feel like I had very strongly before going down to Peru. And I continued on that path of healing, working with ayahuasca and working with other medicines over the course of many years. And then again, going back to this Kova reset that we went through, I wasn't able to travel outside of the country, and my access to community gatherings, all of our access really, stopped, stopped dead in its tracks. And um, I actually started microdosing because I didn't have access to those types of, bigger ceremonies for some time.
Mm,
And I went through the process of just doing a lot of research and learning about the different protocols that you can follow, and different strains, and just learning all of the best practices on how to work with it. And then with with everything that I teach, and all of the ways that I work with people, it's all through my own experience that I've had with these tools and the profound changes that they've had on me. So with microdosing, it was like after within days, and even in the first couple of weeks, I just felt so much better. My mood improved, my clarity of vision improved, my creativity improved. I felt myself so much more just wanting to connect with other people, and connect from a place of like true care, and genuine, deeper connection. And um, the the gifts of microdosing is something that you can bring into your other daily practices and your normal life, to really have a higher and baseline in that it's sustainable. So, one of the things with going and working with larger doses of medicine is that you have a preparation phase, and then you have this peak experience, and then you spend weeks and months and sometimes years integrating that. And within that integration period, there's a lot of ups and downs. And the beauty with microdosing is that it really, like I said, it raises your baseline, and just it helps with getting back into that sacred space, that sacred, you can say like muscle memory, and working with it in an intentional way where you're using the act of microdosing to create a ceremony in itself. So it's like bringing the sacred into what can become the mundane of our day in and day out lives, because we're just doing a lot of the time, we can feel like we're just living on autopilot, right? But when we have that time to create these sacred moments and sacred practices within our normal life container, we start to notice how, special and how magical life is in more areas, right? It
mm.
carries over in many ways.
Yeah. And were you always microdosing with psilocybin or other types of medicines?
I've microdosed with a handful of different medicines. these days when after sitting in an ayahuasca ceremony, I'll microdose with the ayahuasca vine on the after the ceremony, really to help me maintain that very strong connection with the spirit of ayahuasca, and to really continue to process and to really sit with and continue to hold my prayers with that medicine. And it sometimes that will last for just a few days, sometimes it will last for a couple of weeks. Microdosing with ayahuasca really does bring up a lot. And she has such a powerful powerful voice and such a powerful presence. Unless you have a lot of space to really hold that in integrity, I find that microdosing with that plant can be a lot. And when I say microdosing with ayahuasca, it's only microdosing with the vine. It's not microdosing with the ayahuasca brew, which is the chacruna leaf, which has the DMT in it, which is where you get all of the visions and the visuals. But the root, the vine, the ayahuasca vine, is where all of the alkaloids and all of the real spirit and the soul of the medicine are in the vine. So it's really continuing to work with the vine component of the medicine.
So what a
And
great way to deepen with,
yeah,
yeah. And nowadays, and through your facilitation, is it mostly with psilocybin?
yeah, it's pretty much all with psilocybin,
Mhm.
and working with different strains. And part of part of the skill and the versatility of microdosing with mushrooms is that there is a lot of variability, and there's a lot of variability for us individually, just bioenergetically, how sensitive we are to the medicine, and what strain of medicine really works the best with us. So, and also there's a lot of variability that you can bring in based on the different herbs and supplements and adaptogens that you're pairing with the psilocybin. So there's different, you can say, admixtures and different stacks that you can create for yourself depending on what you're really looking to cultivate more in your life and how you're feeling. And it's different for everyone.
Mhm. So for someone though that's never had any experience with psilocybin or any psychoactive plant, and they hear the word microdosing, so it's obviously a smaller dose than what would be the full dose in what people may be picturing as a trip. So walk us through a little bit more about what the microdosing experience is like. Is it as psychoactive? And I know you can do different doses of microdoses, but for somebody who's never experienced it before, what would be maybe a typical or set of expectations that you could explain and give a picture of?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really starts with, for an individual, like what's your why? Like, why are you approaching this medicine now in your life? And what are you hoping to get out of your experience in working with the medicine? And that really helps inform the dose that you work with. And as by definition, microdosing is a subperceptual dose. So that means that it doesn't have any impact on how you feel and your ability to operate in the world and do the things that you need to do in the world at your normal pace. But and many of your listeners who have microdosed before, it's part of the reason that we're microdosing is that we actually do want to have an elevated experience. We do want to have a little bit of opening and a deeper connection with self. So you can raise that microdose level to slightly above subperceptual, all the way, you have to work with it in a way to calibrate your kind of sweet spot to
Mhm.
feel elevated and feel expansive, but not to be disruptive to the other things that you have going on. So I always recommend for people when they're getting started, just start really, really low, because you want to develop a relationship with the medicine, and you want to start to understand how the medicine is going to interact with you. And you can always add more. So, like a standard microdose is about 0.15 grams. And it's so interesting that for some people, that can feel like a lot of medicine. And they'll have to scale back to like maybe half of that. And for some people, they don't really feel anything at 0.15. So they end up, trying double that. And it's it's very different for everybody. But the kind of the rule of thumb is to start slow, start low, and build up from there. And it also, helps kind of build the trust muscle and like psychological safety for ourselves, especially for people that are newer to working with any type of altered state type of medicine experience, to really gain that trust, and trust in the medicine, and then also like trust in ourselves that we are using our intuition, and we're 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 working with the medicine up to a point that we're comfortable with in that time.
Mm. Yeah, that's great advice for so many things of how we approach new things, and rather than approach with fearful trepidation, it's cautious curiosity, right? Or like, ooh, being curious, but
Mhm.
yeah. um, so I love that approach. And we use the term medicine when we talk about plant medicines, which we used to call psychedelics, right? And there's a respect and a sacredness around the languaging of talking about these. I mean, I hate to even call them substances. These are entities. They are um, energetic forms that we are sharing this planet with. And so that languaging around it, I know, is shifting with the people who use and hold them sacred. And I love that shift. As we use the term plant medicine, we obviously think, oh, it's healing something. So what are some of the gifts of healing with, let's just talk psilocybin, because there's obviously, with all of the different entities, there's different effects. But since you work mostly with psilocybin these days, or what are some of those healing gifts?
Yeah, I mean, the psilocybin and fungi in general are just so ancient. Like they they are much more ancient than us as human beings are, and they contain like this very very beautiful intelligence. And our whole ecosystem is reliant on the fungi for us to have life at all. So there's this like super intelligence and super connectivity of them. They are the mycelium network that connects all of the plants and all of the forest, and communication and sharing information. And that really comes through in the essence of the mushrooms. They're very playful, and they want information to be accessible and shared, and want community to flourish. And I see that in the way that they really work through people to bring through and open up these like channels, of and these circuits of inspiration. and this renewed optimism, this new appreciation of life and being alive, and just the gift that that is. And it's very common in our modern time for us to forget and
Mm.
forget about like the true essence of our divine soul, and why we're here, and what a gift it is to even be alive. And they're, rightfully called magic mushrooms because they help, like, that they help ignite that spark of magic.
Mm. So it sounds like the healing is in the connection to soul, connection to our planet and to one another. And through that connection and seeing the magic that's all around us, we can heal from so many different of these mental traumas that we get inflicted with life, right? I mean, there's on the unfortunate thing. It's like the beautiful thing and the unfortunate thing about being in this human experience is that we get to have it all, right? You get to have the wonder and the magic, but we also, some of us, get to go through those initiations of some human shit shows that are traumatic and very real as well. So waking us up to this seeing beyond the trauma or the human the very limited human experience, let's put it that way, that maybe we've all been shoved down. Sounds like such, and I know I've experienced that as a gift from psilocybin too, is that of that opening of um,
And that's the
that we
spiritual.
aren't just in this narrow band.
And that's the spiritual side of it. And then, if we look at it through the lens of science, and we look at the molecule of psilocybin, has a similar shape to the serotonin molecule. So when the psilocybin is in our brain and our guts, it actually plugs into the serotonin receptor sites, the H2A receptor sites, and then mimics the effects of serotonin. So that's a lot of the benefits that come from improved mood, right? And greater, more positive outlook. And really just, all of the autonomic systems of the physical body come into greater health and greater alignment with that.
Mm. There's, I was watching something last night about the endocannabinoid system and how this system exists within our body. And then we're creating both the keys and we have these receptors for it. And then we've got these plants, specifically cannabis, that is also a mimic to those keys that we can take that but we also can trigger these keys within us, even without the substance. Have you had any experience with, not even just with psilocybin, but any of the other medicines that you've used of where you've, after having ingested them and experienced them and had a sacred relationship that was physical, have you had um, spiritual experiences with those plants uh, that were with even without ingesting them, that you've had relationship communication with them, that they've impacted you and actually uh, created shifts in you without even ingesting.
Yeah, and I think that's part of just developing a relationship with the essence of the medicine. So as part of my personal practice, I in the morning, whether I've 10 minutes or I have, 90 minutes, I do some type of like stretching, some type of breath work, some type of embodiment practice. And then I'll close that out with a meditation and with prayer. And in my prayers, it's taking that time to return to those medicines and to acknowledge them, to acknowledge their presence, and to just feel that connection and holding that in gratitude and in reverence. And I feel like through keeping that relationship alive and like asking for help when we need it, when we're facing challenges, it's not something that I can like A B correlate to, in this moment I was told this or this happened because of this, this plant spirit being around. But I feel them with me. And it does take tuning in and acknowledging their presence and asking for them to help guide. And they to me really have become, guides for me. A lot of us
Mhm.
have spirit guides or, power animals that we work with in our prayers and in our practices. And the spirits of the medicines that I've had the privilege to sit with and work with, those are all kind of my arsenal of my spirit guides that I travel around with.
Yeah, part of your soul team.
My soul team.
And it's great, to be reminded of that, and for listeners to see beyond, yes, you might have an angel guide, and people maybe are more familiar with that because it is like another form of us. I think it's easier to be familiarized with something that looks like you, that you can go, oh yeah, okay, that doesn't seem as scary. It's like it's just a, you know, ghostly version of a human, and you can wrap your mind around it. But if we can wrap our mind around that, then I think, next steps and next phases are to see that, oh, that's an energetic form, a spiritual, or you're seeing the spirit of this guide in that form. But that everything being energy, that we are living in this energetic matrix and we are one with that. We are an emanation of that. And so is everything else, right? I mean, the spirit of this plant, this animal, this angel, this building, even the things that I think we create as human beings have and hold spirit and have their own essence and have their own energetic form, that we can commune with so much more than just, I mean, it's unlimited, really. And when we start to practice the connection to energy around us, within us, and align, and like you said earlier, really get discerning about what works for you, because a certain medicine, a certain plant, a certain form, certain crystals and mineral forms really resonate with one person, and it's like, oh well, for another person it's a whole nother set of minerals and crystal formations and things. So we get to have a very unique experience here on this planet, right? Of discovery and exploration. It's unlimited in that sense of, there's so much choice, as you were saying earlier, with the practices. Same with these guides and these energetic forms. There's so much choice that once you start to dig in, we then get to become that discerner and that calibrator, the alchemizer of that, and take it all in, and figure out what is best for us. And and on the one hand, a huge responsibility. And on the other hand, it's like, that's where then all the magic happens, right? Because we all have that power, don't we?
We do, yeah. And that's, as we start to connect with these other intelligences and we work with them and they become like fully integrated into our beingness, that just adds to this like own very unique, almost like diamond, this like spectrum that we carry around in our own vibrational frequency, in our own auric field. And it's so uniquely precious for each of us, right? So the more that we're really in tune with that discernment and with what is true for us and our higher self, and not trying to just collect, collect experiences or collect techniques just for the sake of saying that we're a practitioner of them, or because they're working for somebody else, right? But when we develop that relationship for the things that are in true resonance with our soul's highest expression, that's what like creates this like unbelievable luminosity and radiance that is just part of who we are and how we show up.
Hmm. Yeah. And it's something that you can see in someone like you. Um, and I hope you know that you can see that in you. You can see it. Um, and I'm not just talking about auras and auric fields and things that, but you can see it in your physicality. And I think we can also tune in and see dissonance in people's physicality and then energetic fields if you can see beyond physicality. So I think that's a good place for people to start is figure out what is dissonant for you. What keeps you at a low vibration? For you, it was alcohol and, some other addictive behaviors, maybe even working in a corporate job that wasn't really your soul's mission. For other people, it might be that, they're, um, you know, stifling their voice and they're not actually using their voice in the world and they're holding back and they're not speaking up and they're not speaking truth. And whatever the thing is, we all have, again, that responsibility, but also then with that responsibility comes all this incredible magical power that to look at that and figure out, well, what are the things that I have control over? I have control over the dissonance and the low vibe states that I hold myself in and keep myself bound in. And so working there on that level, um, certainly substances and these plant medicines and practices that we've talked about can help move us from the let's just call them negative behaviors and patterns. I don't think they're truly negative, to be honest. I mean, I don't think that they hold some sort of negative charge and everything over here is positive. I think that they have lessons, great, great lessons for us. And so, in that sense, they're very positive. It's just how we approach it and look at it, right? Or if we're going to look at it. Um, but it seems to be, the first place to start. And so, if someone comes to you and they're experiencing and they're deep in denial or they're deep in a pattern that is creating a very low vibration for them. Do you address that with them through the work with microdosing as well, or is it just administering that and then you kind of let them figure it out from there?
Yeah, and a good place that I like to start with people is just getting like an assessment of where someone is at. And I do really in-depth onboarding with people to understand like what are all the inputs that are getting put into the system, and where, looking at that from the very like basic physical things, but also the environmental and how people are spending their time. Like, what are the inputs that are coming in through different programming and social media? And there's, this evaluation process. And then before adding new things in, it's making space. So doing like this personal audit about, this is where I'm at now, and this is all good and fine. Like, this is exactly, we meet, we meet exactly where we're both at, but then where do we want to go? And when we know where we want to go, then we look at what's already filling up the space in our life, and then we have to start making space and letting go of the kind of the old things that we're carrying around because we've never taken the time to let them go. And then through that process of shedding and making space, then we can bring in these new practices, including microdosing, including, meditation and eating better and spending time outside in nature and getting natural sunlight and, being really like really kind and cultivating self-love by the things that we're putting in ourselves and the internal state that we're cultivating. And that's a good place to start usually.
From your early days of struggling with, you mean you struggled with addiction, but that struggle with addiction was obviously a result of other struggles that I'm thinking you must have had.
Mhm.
So going from that state of being into a state of being where you are so tuned in to your own vibe, you're so tuned in to energy, and you understand how you want to be and show up and experience life these days, and that you aren't a victim to the past, or the things that have happened to you, or even a past behavior that could have been yesterday or the last week, right? I always like to point that out, that the past is the past. It's like the past could be a minute ago or 10 years ago. It's still there. The now is now.
Yeah.
And we always have an opportunity to create a newness in the now. And so from going from that past state where I don't even believe you were Pritam Tara, right? You mean this name is a part of your new form. So in coming into this newer form, what do you feel like you left anything behind? That there's anything that uh, that you miss or that you lack from that?
Nothing. No. I I really consider myself like a continually evolving and transforming person. And even like in my gene keys, one of my gifts is veneration um, and grafting. So it's kind of like cutting the things that no longer serve. The stalk remains the same and remains very resilient, but it's kind of like letting go of the things that are no longer serving. So I I feel I do that very gracefully in letting things go. Now habits become sticky and it's not always easy to really shed things and let them go. But there is a lot of determination and grace that comes through with that.
Mm. Where can people connect to you and learn more about you?
Yeah. My website is a great place to start. That has information about all of the different programs and offerings that I am currently putting out there in the world. And that's at pritamtara.com. And we can connect on Instagram. I have just kind of gotten back into posting regularly on Instagram. So I'm just getting into a good momentum there and showing up more. And then I have a bunch of free resources on my website as well. So I have some guides on different dosing essentials, and I've got a beautiful divine truffle recipe for creating kind of your own sacred ceremony medicine dose at home, and a morning routine guide as well. And yeah, I also have microdosing, kind of getting started microdosing easy, and we'll I think put links for all of those in the show notes.
Yes, we sure will. I'm so happy that we connected and in general and in life. This is such a joy for me to do this podcast because I get to meet, yes, I've done, many episodes with friends and people that I already know, but, with someone like you, got to meet you and connect and be connected now in life. So thank you so much for reaching out. Thank you for coming on to the show. I'm excited for people to learn more about you. Yeah, all the show notes will include all the links and anything you want to leave people with today.
I would say the only kind of closing thoughts would be like we truly are our own healer. And we are so fortunate to be, you know, if we're listening to this podcast, then, we are in a position that we are working on ourselves and going through, personal development. And we're so privileged to have access to so many tools and so many modalities for healing, and just really like wanting to empower like each and every person who's listening to this is that we have everything that we need to heal ourselves. And, no one outside of us is going to do it for us. But we've got lots
Here,
of,
here to that.
yeah.
Yay. Awesome.